Good morning, everyone. My name is Juliano Calil. I'm an adjunct professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. I'm also a co-founder at Virtual Planet Technologies, where we develop immersive experiences in climate adaptation. So I have my email here and our websites if you want to check it out after the session. As we know, climate is changing, sea levels are rising, sea level rise rates are increasing, but also more intense storms are getting more frequent and they're moving slower and dumping a lot more water in shorter periods of times than they used to in the past. And the way we communicate sea level rise today, there's some studies showing it's not really effective. So I stumbled upon this study earlier this year where it was a couple of professors interviewed about 1,000 residents in Florida, and then they showed flood maps similar to the ones you see here on the right corner bottom here of the screen, and they didn't show the maps to some of the other residents. And starkly, they found that the residents that looked at those maps were less likely to accept that climate was changing. It's really starking. And moreover, they found that across the board, folks didn't expect that sea level rise would have an impact to their property values. And that was across the political spectrum, which was a surprising finding as well. And typically, these are the kinds of images that we use, right? Even when it's higher resolution, it's really hard to relate to some of the features or recognize buildings even. And the blue shaded areas over the land try to depict some sort of flooding. So it's not really an effective way. We're not used of looking at things from this perspective. And so that's kind of what was one of the ideas that came up to me a few years back, because I've been flying drones here in Santa Cruz where I live, getting this beautiful images from the coastline, and I had this thought maybe we could capture this reality into some sort of an application to communicate climate impacts that may be a more effective way to do that. So as you can see here, we were able to create some really realistic 3D models of our coastline here in Santa Cruz. You can see the boardwalk here and the neighborhood around it by the river. And in this image now, you can see we use this 360 aerial views that show projected flooding. In this case, it's 2.4 feet of sea level rise combined with an extreme storm, which is expected to happen here in Santa Cruz around mid-century, so not too far out. And so we developed this interface. I'll talk a little bit more about the features of our tools as I walk you through some of our case studies. But basically, you have 3D models, you have the sliding bar that you can interact with and look at sea level rising in real time. You can choose different locations, it's multi-language, and it has a couple other features as well that we include there. So how do we do this? The first step is that, as I mentioned, we fly the drones over a coastline in this search grid pattern, and using this process called photogrammetry, we develop this hyper-realistic 3D models of the coastline, and they're very accurate in resolution as well. You can take measures on them, and they look really, really great. One of the challenges that we have is that, like this model, when I finished it, it had around 800 million polygons, and to make it fit well in VR, you have to reduce it to about 80,000. So it's one of our challenges here, but it's kind of a fun one to work through. So why did we decide to look into immersive solutions, right? So there's emerging research showing that they promote pro-social behavior change. They increase preparation for natural disasters, and folks declared intent to both evacuate from flood-prone areas, but also purchase flood insurance. Additionally, interactive images are needed and more effective in risk communication, and they can even weaken science politicization with the right context to them. So it's a really important thing, use of this. And another thing that I am particularly interested is, could immersive technologies or visuals also change people's preferences to coastal adaptation choices? Maybe what about their intent to relocate from the coast, or this idea of managed retreat, which is so controversial at the moment, but could these tools help to facilitate a conversation around that? And also, could they foster the co-production of inclusive resilience strategies? So hinting here at social justice, environmental justice, and more equity in climate adaptation as well. So just wanted to briefly introduce our core team here. On the top left is Paulo Salvatore. He's the VR guru in the company and really helps us to develop this really great framework that we have that's mostly drag and drop these days on, once you have the contents for a new city. Just to give you an idea, Paulo was hired to teach at a college about 2 months after he graduated from that same college. I'm there in the middle, on the middle left. So I have a PhD in ocean sciences with a focus on climate adaptation. I also have a master's in environmental science and management and a bachelor in business. And at the bottom left is Gianluca. He's our artist. He's a 3D modeler. He also codes, and he's our sound engineer as well. So I think the great things about our team is that we have very complementary skills that made it possible to develop these tools. So we developed this tool called the Sea Level Rise Explorer. It's really a framework now. And our first project was at Turner Station in Maryland. So just to put that in context, Turner Station is outside of Baltimore on the east coast of the United States, on the Chesapeake Bay. And Turner Station is a traditional African-American neighborhood, and they're looking at reviving the neighborhood. And part of that effort includes revitalizing this great park that they have there. So this is what the park looks like. This is Fleming Park, and the neighborhood is called Turner Station. And part of the idea here is that you use dredge materials from the harbor to fill the area around the park, put some soil, plant some vegetation. It's what's called a living shoreline. And they're going through those efforts, and they're raising money, and they're doing additional studies at the moment on the neighborhood. But one of the great things that came up in this project, and I think was one of the most gratifying things about this whole work to date, was the focus of this study was really on the park. So you can see here, it's super vulnerable to sea level rise, it's low lying, and people were talking about a plan to make it more resilient and keep up with sea level rise. And one of the photos, the gentleman you saw next to me in the pictures before, Larry Bannerman, he grew up in this neighborhood, and he used to play baseball on those fields. And today the fields barely see any action because the soils are always soggy over there from even high tide. But the thing that I wanted to share is this: if you look at the right side here, you see this entire neighborhood and the houses underwater. And that wasn't the scope of the project. The project was really focused on the park. But when we sent the models, the projected flood models, and in this case we use NOAA's sea level rise projections, I forgot to take out the neighborhood from the specifications to the artists. And then when the rendering, and Gianluca, you met him earlier, did the rendering, he included the whole region. And when I saw this, I had seen the models, I had seen the maps and the blue images with the flood on top of them. But when I saw that, it was like getting punched in the gut, because like, oh my God, we're not even talking about the neighborhood. And then we had a debate, and we decided to keep the image with that in. And now there is a conversation starting about neighborhood resilience as well. Maybe the same approaches to protect the park might be used to protect the neighborhood. So, which was a great feeling. And as I mentioned, this is a link to the NPR story on Morning Edition, where they were with us and they recorded, the reactions from the residents, and it was a great event. So I mentioned some of our key features. One of them that I like to talk about now is like this idea that every location that we go, the Sea Level Rise Explorer, we create a custom virtual room. And that, I think, really helps when you put the headsets on and you look around and you're inside that neighborhood. You can get the feel for it. In this case, as we're walking around Turner Station, their senior center, we saw this image. There's a wall with the Turner Station grates. So we add those photos to the VR. And then when you click on this link below the photo wall there, you can hear Larry Bannerman talking about the neighborhood and the great folks that live there. So we work with this idea of interactive storytelling. There's also always a narration, multi-platform, multiple languages as well. We have surveys of preferences that we include in some of the versions. And as I mentioned, 3D models. And we're also now working on showing adaptation, not just risks, right? But what about the solutions? And we include highlights of specific areas or features in the terrain as well. So from Turner Station, we're now across the country here in California, Santa Cruz, where I live. And then we did a project here to illustrate the projected impacts of sea level rise and coastal storms in the city by mid and late century. So this is Calil Beach, one of the most popular here in Santa Cruz. And you can see again with 2.4 feet of sea level rise and a coastal storm, the impacts there. And here in Santa Cruz, we held an exhibit at the public library with their support. So we had 4 headsets out there and folks could just come in and check them out and go through the experience. And in over, I think it was under 3 months, actually, we had over 400 participants, just people that walked through the library, saw the signs, and then asked to check out the headsets and go through the experience. And again, we had this really great, we had a mini survey, and we had some really great quotes from folks, even folks that study sea level rise, said it make it a reality. It's not just words anymore. And again, about this, how real this, how real the tools can make, even some projections, even though they're not actually real, but it really drives it home. On our post-experience mini survey, we had about 143 participants, and 77% declared that the experience had significantly increased their awareness in sea level rise, or of sea level rise. And the tool was used to support 2 projects. There was a transportation project that was focused on the West Cliff Drive, which is like an iconic road here in Santa Cruz on the coast, and another project looking at coastal access and impacts to our sandy beaches as well. So then from Santa Cruz, we moved down coast near LA, Los Angeles. So this is an application that we developed for Long Beach in California, where the idea here was, could we use tools like this and what kind of conversation could we have, focus on what could be done in the region so folks and residents and businesses could stay where they are for as long as possible. And then when we started the project, these were the kinds of visuals that we were using to communicate risk. Again, those aerial views with blue shaded areas. If you're not familiar with the area, it's even kind of hard to realize what's happening. So we went out there, got a lot of great aerial footage, and then we came up with this 3D models of that entire peninsula. And one of the things we learned, as you can see well here, that wasn't evident, you can't even see that on a static image, is that the water floods from behind. So the beach is here at the bottom of the image. I'll play that again. And you can see the water is actually flooding the neighborhood from the bay side, which was an impact. People kind of knew that, but no one realized it. So even if you would build like a giant seawall in front of that neighborhood, it would not resolve the problem. And here's an aerial view, and you can see even with 0.8 feet of sea level rise, the whole back part of the neighborhood gets impacted. And on this image, I'd just like to point out as well that there is this thing with virtual reality where it kind of tricks your brain, really. If you're afraid of heights, your palms will sweat, your heart will beat a little faster, you definitely feel it. But on this, what we did is that you're sitting on top of a platform on the blimp, so that takes away a lot of that. And here again is an event that we held with the community, and you can see the folks sitting in the chairs in the semicircle there at the center of the image are actual residents from the peninsula that were experiencing looking at their homes flooding, and we're talking about, okay, what's the plan here? How can we make sure that we protect our assets, but also have this open conversation about maybe by the end of the century, in 40, 60, 80 years, we might have to start thinking about moving, or thinking about moving now, so we have a plan when the need comes. And we also had an artist there that was great, that came up with this, was capturing the meeting as it was happening, so folks could just get up and go talk to her and see. It was a great kind of documentation of the experience there, the meeting. And at the end, it was like, you can see at the top here, it was 9 p.m. It was a long meeting, started at 5. But there was this general sense that, yeah, it's a problem, but there is a path forward that we can take. So another project we're working on is at Elkhorn Slough here in California. So Elkhorn Slough is about halfway between Monterey and Santa Cruz, about an hour and a half from San Francisco, just south. And so this is the Elkhorn Slough, and you can see here, this is Highway 1. It's a very low-lying area, and it's very vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise. So with high tide projections, where mid-century the highway could be flooded constantly. So we're looking at this project. This is also the home of those adorable guys, sea otters. People come from far to kayak and see the sea otters in the area. So there's a big recreation value as well, and economic value to the region from that. And here's some of the projections that we were working with. So this is what you first see. This is current levels, and then when this road here on the left floods, that's about mid-century at high tide. And then by the end of the century, at 5 feet of projected sea level rise, you can see the entire area is underwater. And that's not with a storm. This is just from high tide. So this is the back of the slough, so more inland, and then here you can see what it would look like with the marsh restored by mid-century, and now what it could look like by the end of the century if it's more resilient. Whereas if you didn't do any restoration projects here, this whole area would just become open water. We're also creating 3D models of the region. Again, here you can see Highway 1, very low-lying area. And what we're going to do next in this project is we're going to model what would the highway look like elevated, either on piles or on fill, with a gentle slope around the sides to protect it against wave action, to make it more resistant and resilient to sea level rise in the future. We're also working on other projects. We are working on a multi-user experience, which I think it's the next step in virtual reality and immersive solutions like this, where you can actually interact in that environment. So this idea of social VR. We're also developing a sea level rise explorer negotiations game, where you get to play the role of a stakeholder on the coast and see things from their standpoint and try to negotiate, what solutions would be more appealing to you. And we also develop, you can see on the right, a UVC box, because with the pandemic, as I think it's going to be a while until we're back into holding events where we can bring the headsets, but when we do, we'll be able to sterilize them in under a minute using UVC technology. We're also developing several research projects around social sciences. So how does the immersiveness of these tools may affect, or how could it affect people's perceptions and risk tolerance and things like that. And we're also developing a wildfire VR experience with the town of Paradise here in California that was devastated by the Camp Fire in 2018. So with that, I just wanted to give a big shout out to our main partners. The Nature Conservancy has been a supporter from the get-go. The City of Santa Cruz has been an amazing partner on this. Turner Station conservation teams, and more recently too, we got some funds from the Ocean Protection Council in California and the Santa Barbara County. We're working with them on a solution for one of their coastal areas as well. And I'll leave the full list of partners here, so feel free to browse through them. Shout out to Stanford and the Virtual Human Interactions Lab. We have a good relationship going with them on some research projects, and then you can see that. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to your questions. Here are some links again to my email. Please get in touch. Our Sea Level Rise Explorer tools are available now at the Oculus Go store for the VR headset. But you can also download it for iPhone, Android, or run it on your website or just on any web browser. So thank you so much.